Someone just insulted you in front of everyone. Your chest is tight. Your face is hot. Every part of your body is screaming at you to defend yourself, to fire back, to win. And in that exact second, the most powerful man in the Roman Empire would have said nothing at all. Marcus Aurelius had one sentence he repeated to himself every time someone tried to provoke him. One sentence. That's it. And it disarmed people more completely than any insult ever could. Today I'm giving you that sentence. And by the end of this video, you'll never lose an argument to your own anger again. Welcome back to Wisdom of the Stoics, the channel where we take the oldest, hardest-won wisdom in human history and turn it into something you can actually use today. No fluff, no motivational shouting, just the calm, battle-tested philosophy that helped emperors rule, slaves find freedom, and ordinary people survive chaos with their dignity intact. If you're new here, welcome. Consider subscribing, because what you're about to learn isn't just theory, it's armor. And once you put it on, you'll wonder how you ever went without it. Let's begin. Let's start with something uncomfortable. Provocation is not an accident. It is not a careless slip of someone's tongue. It is almost always a calculated move, even if the person doing it doesn't fully realize they're doing it. Think about the last time someone provoked you. Maybe it was a coworker who made a snide comment in a meeting. Maybe it was a family member who brought up an old wound at dinner, knowing exactly where it would land. Maybe it was a stranger online, typing something designed purely to make your blood boil. What did they actually want? They didn't want information. They didn't want a debate. They wanted a reaction. They wanted to see your composure crack, because in that crack, they find power. Your anger is the proof they were looking for, proof that they got to you, that they control something inside you that you should control yourself. This is the trap. And here's the part that should genuinely unsettle you. Every time you respond with anger, with a sharp comeback, with raised volume, you're not winning. You're paying the toll they set for you. You're handing them exactly what they came for. Epictetus, who was born into slavery and later became one of the most respected philosophers in Rome, knew this trap intimately. He had spent years of his life with almost no control over his external circumstances, beaten, displaced, owned by another human being. And yet he wrote some of the most liberating words in the history of philosophy, that we suffer not from the things that happen to us, but from our judgment about those things. Read that again. It wasn't the insult that hurt you. It was the meaning you assigned to it the instant it landed. So if a man who had nothing, no freedom, no body that was legally his own, could master this, what does that say about the power we're giving away over a comment from a coworker, or a stranger on the internet, or a relative who's said the same cutting joke for 15 years? It says we've been playing the wrong game. We've been treating provocation like a battle we need to win, when really it's a test we need to pass. And the test isn't about who has the sharper tongue. It's about who walks away with their peace intact. Now you might be thinking, but if I don't respond, doesn't that mean they win? Doesn't silence mean I have no comeback? This is exactly the misunderstanding we're going to dismantle today, because the Stoics weren't advocating for weakness. They weren't telling you to be a doormat, to swallow your dignity, to let people walk over you without consequence. Quite the opposite. What they discovered was something far more devastating to provocateurs than any insult could ever be. Stick with me, because in the next section, I'm going to show you exactly what that is, and why it terrified people far more than anger ever did. Here it is, the sentence Marcus Aurelius used, recorded in his private journal, a journal he never intended anyone else to read, which is exactly why we can trust it as genuine, unfiltered wisdom rather than a performance for an audience. He wrote, "If anyone can refute me, show me I'm making a mistake or looking at things from the wrong perspective. I'll gladly change. It's the truth I'm after, and the truth never harmed anyone." Read it again, slowly, because the power here is easy to miss on a first pass. This isn't a clever comeback. It's not designed to humiliate the other person. It's not even really aimed at them at all. It's a sentence Marcus said internally, to himself, before he ever opened his mouth. And what it does is extraordinary. It strips the provocation of its power before you even respond. Here's why. When someone provokes you, they're hoping you'll treat their words as an attack on your identity, something that demands defense. But Marcus reframed every insult, every criticism, every jab as simply information. Possibly true, possibly false. If true, it's useful. Now he knows something he didn't before. If false, it cost him nothing, because he never agreed to be wounded by something untrue. Now apply this in real life. Picture this. You're at a family gathering, and your uncle, who said this joke every year for a decade, makes a comment about your career choices. Still doing that little hobby of yours, or did you finally get a real job? The old you wants to defend, to list achievements, to prove him wrong, maybe even to insult him back. But what if instead you simply thought, if there's truth in what he said, I should examine it. If there isn't, his words don't define me, only my reaction would. And then, and this is the genius of it, you say something like, maybe, what makes you say that? Or simply, interesting that you'd think that, said with zero defensiveness, zero heat, just calm curiosity. Watch what happens to the provocateur in that moment. They came prepared for a fight. You didn't show up to one. There's nothing for them to push against. The energy they were counting on to escalate the moment simply isn't there. Most people faced with this deflate almost instantly. Some even become a little embarrassed, because suddenly their provocation looks exactly like what it was. An attempt to get a reaction exposed in broad daylight. This is what I mean when I say the Stoic silence wasn't weakness. It was the single most disarming weapon available to a human being. Anger validates the attacker. Calm questions dismantle them. Seneca, in his letters to Lucilius, described anger as a kind of temporary madness and a state in which we surrender our reason entirely to the will of whatever provoked us. He wrote that no other emotion is more eager to display its full force, and none more in need of being held back, precisely because anger's most dangerous trick is convincing you it's powerful while it's actually making you the most predictable, most controllable version of yourself. Think about that for a second. The angrier you get, the more predictable you become. The provocateur knows exactly which buttons to press, because you've shown them where the buttons are. Calm, by contrast, is unreadable. Calm gives them nothing to work with. So the sentence isn't really about winning an argument. It's a tool to remind you, in the heat of the moment, that you have a choice about what role you're going to play in this exchange, and that the most powerful role available to you is the one where you simply don't take the bait. But I know what some of you are thinking right now. This sounds great in theory, but what happens when the provocation is severe? When it's not a joke at a family dinner, but something genuinely cruel, genuinely unfair? That's exactly where we're going next. Because the Stoics didn't just have an answer for mild irritation. They had an answer for the worst provocations imaginable. Let's talk about real stakes. Not a snide comment at dinner. Betrayal at the highest level a human being can experience. In 175 AD, while Marcus Aurelius was away from Rome dealing with a health crisis so severe that false rumors of his death had spread across the empire, one of his most trusted generals, Avidius Cassius, declared himself emperor, a man Marcus had personally elevated, trusted with command of entire legions, turned around and tried to seize the throne the moment he believed Marcus was dead or dying. This is provocation on a scale almost none of us will ever face. This is betrayal soaked in ambition, dressed up as opportunity, and it came from someone who owed his entire position to Marcus's trust. And how did Marcus respond? Historical accounts tell us that when Marcus learned of the revolt, he didn't erupt in vengeful fury. He reportedly told his soldiers and advisors that he hoped to have the chance to forgive Cassius, to look him in the eye and ask only why he had done it, and then offer him mercy. He is recorded as saying that he wished no one to be killed during this entire affair if it could possibly be avoided, and that he grieved the necessity of civil conflict more than he feared the threat to his own throne. Before Marcus could even act on this, Cassius was killed by his own soldiers, who perhaps sensed which way the wind was blowing. And when his head was brought to Marcus as a trophy, the ultimate provocation, an invitation to celebrate vengeance fulfilled, Marcus refused to look at it. He ordered it buried, denied the soldiers who delivered it the reward they expected, and extended clemency to Cassius's family and the cities that had supported the rebellion. Think about what restraint at that level actually requires. This was not a man incapable of anger. This was not a man without the power to enact total, brutal revenge, he commanded. The most powerful military force on earth. He had every justification, every resource, and every opportunity to make an example of anyone connected to the betrayal. He chose not to, not because he was weak, not because he didn't feel the sting of the betrayal. He almost certainly did, deeply, but because he had spent decades training his mind to ask one question before reacting to anything. What does this provocation cost me if I let it control my actions? Versus, what does it cost me if I don't? If Marcus had executed everyone connected to Cassius's rebellion, what would he have gained? A moment of satisfaction, perhaps. But he would have confirmed every fear that Rome's enemies and allies alike harbored, that emperors rule through fear and vengeance rather than justice and reason. He would have spent his moral capital on a momentary feeling. By choosing restraint, he did something far more powerful. He made his enemies' rebellion look small and petty in comparison to his response. History remembers Cassius as a footnote. History remembers Marcus's mercy as one of the defining moments of his character. Now you might be sitting there thinking, I'm never going to face a military rebellion. How does this apply to my life? But that's exactly the point. The scale of the provocation doesn't matter. The mechanism is identical whether it's an empire or an email. Someone wrongs you. Your nervous system screams for retaliation. And in that moment, you have the same choice Marcus had. React in a way that feels satisfying for 10 seconds, or respond in a way that serves who you actually want to be for the rest of your life. This is the real test of Stoic philosophy. Not whether you can stay calm when nothing's at stake, but whether you can stay calm when everything feels like it is. And this brings us to a question that I think most people get completely backwards when they first encounter Stoicism. Does staying calm mean you just accept everything? Does it mean you never stand up for yourself? The answer might surprise you, and it's exactly what we're covering next. I want to clear up the single biggest misconception people have about Stoicism, because if we don't address it, everything else in this video risks being misapplied. Stoicism is not about suppressing your emotions. It's not about becoming an emotionless robot who lets people treat you however they want because you've trained yourself not to feel the provocation. That version of Stoicism is a cartoon, and frankly, it's dangerous because it leads people to bottle up legitimate anger and frustration until it either explodes destructively or turns inward as resentment and anxiety. The actual Stoic position is far more sophisticated. The goal isn't to feel nothing. The goal is to not let the feeling make your decisions for you. There's an important distinction the Stoics drew between what they called the first movements of emotion, the involuntary jolt of anger, fear, or hurt that arises the instant something happens to us, and what we choose to do with that jolt afterward. Seneca was explicit about this. He acknowledged that even the wisest person will feel their pulse quicken, their face flush, their stomach tighten when they're insulted or threatened. That physical reaction is not a moral failing. It's simply what it means to be a human animal with a nervous system. The discipline, the actual philosophy, lives entirely in what happens in the next moment. Do you let that jolt of anger write the script for your next 60 seconds? Or do you let it pass through you, observe it, and then choose your response from a place of reason rather than reflex? This is why standing up for yourself and practicing Stoicism are not opposites. They're actually deeply compatible when done correctly. Epictetus himself, despite preaching restraint and acceptance of what's outside our control, was famously blunt and even sharp-tongued when correcting his students. He didn't pretend insults didn't happen. He didn't let injustice slide by unnamed. What he refused to do was let his reaction to injustice be dictated by rage, rather than clarity. There's a real difference between someone who says, "What you just said was completely unfair, and here's why," delivered with steady eye contain and a level voice, and someone who screams the same sentiment red-faced, with their hands shaking. The content might be identical. The first version lands as unshakable confidence. The second version reads as someone who's lost control of themselves. And people instinctively discount it, even when the underlying point is valid. This is the version of saying only this that actually matters in real life. It's not always literal silence. Sometimes the most stoic response is a single, calm, precisely chosen sentence that states a boundary without a hint of emotional bleed. Things like, "That's not something I'm going to accept. I think you know that's not true. We can talk again when this is calmer." Notice what all of these have in common. They're short. They're declarative. They don't ask permission. They don't over-explain. And critically, they don't escalate. They close a door rather than opening 10 new ones for argument. This is what Marcus's sentence was really teaching. Not eternal silence, but a deliberate pause that lets you choose precision over explosion. So if you've ever worried that practicing stoic calm will turn you into someone who just absorbs mistreatment forever, let that fear go. The wisdom we're building today doesn't ask you to disappear. It asks you to show up with so much command over yourself that nobody can manipulate you into a version of yourself you don't respect. And speaking of command over yourself, there's a specific mental tool the Stoics used, almost like a rehearsal, that prepared them for these moments before they ever happened. It's one of the most practical techniques in the entire philosophy, and it's what we're covering right now. Here's something almost nobody tells you about composure. It is not a personality trait some people are simply born with, while others aren't. It is a skill, and like any skill, it can be trained. Specifically, through a practice the Stoics called premeditatio malorum, the premeditation of adversity. The idea is deceptively simple. Instead of waiting for provocation to catch you off guard, you deliberately imagine it in advance, in detail, while you're calm, so that when it actually happens, you're not improvising your reaction for the first time under pressure. You've already rehearsed it. Seneca wrote about this extensively in his letters. He advised against the kind of naive optimism that assumes things will always go smoothly, that people will always be kind, that no one will ever try to humiliate or provoke you. Instead, he suggested actively imagining specific, difficult scenarios. The insult from a colleague, the betrayal from a friend, the unfair accusation from a stranger. Not to live in fear of these things, but to strip them of their shock value in advance. Think about why this works on a purely practical level. The reason provocation catches us off guard and triggers such an intense reaction is partly because it's unexpected. Our nervous system treats the surprise itself as a kind of threat, on top of the provocation. But if you've already mentally walked through the scenario, if some version of what would I do if my coworker took credit for my work in front of our boss has already played out in your mind, then when it actually happens, there's a part of you that recognizes the shape of the moment. You're not starting from zero. You're executing a plan you've already considered. Let me give you a concrete way to actually do this, because I don't want this to stay abstract. Take 5 minutes, maybe tonight before you go to sleep. Think of the person or situation most likely to provoke you in the coming days or weeks. Maybe it's a specific relative will bring up a sore subject at an upcoming gathering. Maybe it's a co-worker whose passive-aggressive comments have become a pattern. Maybe it's simply the anonymous cruelty of online comments if you put any of your work out into the world. Now picture the scene in specific detail. What will they likely say? What's the worst version of the comment they might make? And then, this is the crucial part, mentally rehearse your response. Not a furious, satisfying response, the calm, short, undefended response. Picture yourself saying it evenly. Picture their reaction to your lack of reaction. Picture yourself walking away with your composure completely intact, maybe even feeling a quiet sense of having passed a test. This is not negative thinking. This is not anxiety. There's an important distinction between anxious rumination, which spirals without purpose and just generates dread, and premeditation, which has a specific goal, stripping fear and shock out of a future moment so that when it arrives, you're already familiar with it. Marcus Aurelius did a version of this every single morning. In the opening of Book 2 of his Meditations, he wrote, and I'm paraphrasing, the spirit of it here, that he would remind himself each morning that he would encounter difficult people that day, people who would be ungrateful, arrogant, deceitful, jealous, and unsociable. And rather than letting this realization breed cynicism or dread, he used it to immunize himself. By the time he actually encountered rudeness or provocation, it wasn't a shock to his system. It was something he'd already accounted for. He'd already decided hours earlier who he was going to be in that moment. This is such a profound reframe of how most of us approach our days. Most people wake up hoping nothing difficult happens, and then feel ambushed and destabilized the moment something does. Marcus woke up expecting difficulty, which meant difficulty. When it arrived, found him already standing in the posture of someone who'd decided how to handle it. I want you to try this, genuinely, this week. Pick one relationship or situation in your life that regularly provokes you. Spend just a few minutes rehearsing your calm response before you're ever in the moment. You will be shocked at how different it feels when the actual provocation arrives and you realize, I've already been here. I already know what I'm going to say. But preparation alone doesn't answer one of the hardest emotional questions buried inside all of this. What do you do with the part of you that still, even after all this practice, wants to lash out? What do you do with the leftover anger that doesn't just evaporate because you understand the philosophy? That's what we need to talk about next, because pretending that part of us doesn't exist would be dishonest. Let's be honest with each other for a moment. Even with all this wisdom, even with rehearsal, even with the perfect sentence ready in your mind, sometimes the anger doesn't just dissolve the second you decide to be calm. Sometimes you say the right words. You walk away with composure on the outside, and your insides are still burning for hours afterward. This is normal. This is human. And the Stoics, despite their reputation for icy detachment, actually had a great deal of compassion for this experience, because nearly all of them lived through real loss, real injustice, and real humiliation themselves. Seneca's brother died. His political enemies forced him into exile and later compelled his suicide. Epictetus lived as a slave for a significant portion of his life and likely endured physical abuse. There's a tradition, possibly true, that his leg was permanently injured by a master's violence. Marcus Aurelius buried multiple children, faced betrayal from those closest to him, and ruled during one of the worst plagues in Roman history. These were not men insulated from pain, dispensing calm advice from a position of comfort. They were men who had every reason to be permanently embittered, and chose, deliberately and with effort, not to be. So if the anger lingers in you after a provocation, even after you've handled the moment with outward composure, that doesn't mean you've failed at this. It means you're human, and humans process things on a timeline that isn't always convenient. What the Stoics offer here isn't a way to instantly erase the residual anger. It's a way to make sure that residual anger doesn't compound into something worse, resentment. Resentment is anger that's been allowed to set up permanent residence. It's the difference between a bruise that heals and a wound that gets reopened every time you think about the person who provoked you. One practice that helps enormously here is something Marcus returned to again and again, examining whether the person who provoked you acted out of malice or out of their own confusion and suffering. He wrote that wrongdoers act the way they do because they don't actually know what is good or bad. They're operating from a distorted understanding, mistaking cruelty for strength or insecurity for superiority. This doesn't excuse their behavior. It doesn't mean you owe them your forgiveness on demand, or that you should pretend what they did was acceptable. But it does something subtle and useful. It shifts your relationship to the event from, "This happened to wound me specifically," to, "This happened because this person is, in some way, lost." That shift takes the provocation out of the realm of personal injury and puts it into the realm of almost weather. You don't take a hailstorm personally. You don't lie awake resenting the clouds. You simply note that the storm happened, take whatever precautions are sensible, and move forward. This doesn't mean every provocateur deserves your pity or that you should let people off the hook for genuinely harmful behavior. There's a difference between understanding why someone acted poorly and excusing it without consequence. You can hold both. Compassion for the confusion that drives cruelty, and firm boundaries that protect you from it happening again. And here's a practical technique for the lingering anger itself. Give it a container. Don't pretend it doesn't exist, and don't let it run wild indefinitely either. Some people find it useful to set aside a specific, brief window, maybe 10 minutes that evening, where they allow themselves to fully feel and even articulate the anger, perhaps writing it down exactly as it is, unfiltered. And then when that window closes, they deliberately turn attention elsewhere. This isn't suppression, it's containment. You're not pretending the feeling isn't real. You're simply refusing to let it have unlimited access to your entire day. If you found this useful so far, this would be a great moment to drop a comment below telling me about a time you wish you'd had this kind of mental preparation before a provocation. Caught you off guard? I read every single one, and honestly, some of the stories you all share teach me as much as any ancient text does. Now there's one more layer to this that I think is the most important of the entire video, because it answers the question of why any of this matters in the first place. Why does it matter whether you respond with composure or with rage? What's actually at stake? That's where we're going next. Here is the deepest truth buried inside everything we've covered today. And I want you to really sit with this one. Every time you respond to provocation with the same energy it was delivered in, every time you match insult with insult, rage with rage, you are not protecting yourself. You are actually surrendering the one thing that was never under threat in the first place, your character. Think about what provocation can actually take from you if you let it. It cannot take your achievements. It cannot take the people who genuinely know and love you. It cannot rewrite your history or erase your competence. The only thing provocation can ever actually steal is your composure, and it can only steal that with your permission. Marcus Aurelius had a phrase for this, one of the most famous in the entire Meditations. He described the mind, when it withdraws into itself and finds peace there, as being like a fortress. No matter what is happening outside the walls, armies, chaos, betrayal, the fortress itself remains untouched as long as you don't open the gates yourself. He wrote that nothing outside the mind can disturb it unless it disturbs itself. The disturbance comes entirely from within, from our own judgments about what's happening to us. This is what's actually at stake every time someone tries to provoke you. They're testing whether the gates are open, and every time you respond with calm, with a single chosen sentence rather than an explosion, you're not just winning that interaction. You're proving to yourself, in real time, that the fortress holds. That you are, in fact, the kind of person you've been trying to become. There's something almost spiritual in this, even outside any specific religious framework. Every provocation you face is, in a strange way, a small initiation ritual. It's an opportunity, disguised as an annoyance, to practice becoming someone who is not run by their impulses. And the wild thing is, this compounds. Every single time you choose the calm response over the explosive one, you make the next provocation slightly easier to handle. You're not just managing a single moment, you're building a different relationship with your own emotional reactivity, one rep at a time. This is why the Stoics treated philosophy not as an academic subject to admire from a distance, but as a discipline, almost athletic in nature. Epictetus often compared the philosophical life to training for the Olympic Games. You don't get to skip the difficult days of practice and still expect to perform when the real test comes. Every provocation in your actual life is practice. Every irritating coworker, every condescending relative, every cruel stranger online is, whether they know it or not, giving you a free training session in becoming ungovernable by your own anger. And I want to be precise about what ungovernable means here, because it's not about becoming cold or distant from the people in your life. It's